Now, GLO is proud to partner with the Rescued Pets movement, and this is something that I think all of us can't turn away from when we see these images, but an estimated 1 million homeless dogs and cats roam the streets of our great city, and Rescued Pets movement gives pets needing a home really a second chance at life, sometimes by literally pulling them off of death row. Once saved and in foster homes, these pets receive crucial rehab, medical care, everything they lacked on the streets while they were there. And we've teamed up with that animal welfare organization in areas across the U.S., even up in Canada, with a high demand for adoptable pets, and then we transport those pets to finding forever homes. So it's a great thing. And since the year 2013, Rescued Pets movement has saved the lives of more than 27,000 homeless companion animals by rescuing them from area shelters, taking them from those shelters, and taking them to permanent homes. So this is a great thing. 100% of the donations they receive goes directly toward helping homeless pets that are right here in the city of Houston. So your donations, if you're able to do so, are tax deductible and make a huge difference. So thank you so much for that. We'd like to welcome Judge Robert Eccles, who will be next month's Luncheon speaker. And of course, let's get a good round of applause. Now, next month, Judge Eccles will discuss the status of the Central Texas high-speed rail. There's been a lot of talk about that, and the high-speed bullet train that will connect, ultimately, Houston to DFW. Nearly 50,000 of us Texans drive back and forth between Houston and Dallas. And I mean, this stat, 50,000 of us more than once a week, and many more make that trip very regularly. And I do that to see my family up in Plano. And the 240-mile high-speed rail line will offer a total travel time of less than 90 minutes with departures every 30 minutes. It sounds good. No more 45. So a lot of people excited about that, and of course to hear from you, Judge. Judge Eccles, of course, served as county judge for Harris County, Texas for 12 years and has been elected to the Texas legislature, where he served 6 terms as a state representative. So we'll hope you all can join us next month for that.
All right. I was watching what was going on. I knew that Sammy was out rescuing people on a boat. We couldn't get out of our house because the water was 3 feet deep all around us, and it came within an inch or two of our house, which is the day I learned that my wife was a prayer warrior. I was running around trying to think about how I could lift the furniture and get the boxes off the floor in the garage, and I'm looking. I yelled at her. I said, "Are you going to help?" I couldn't find her. I walked around the house. I went to the front room. There she is, standing in the window singing and praying. The water stopped an inch from coming in. That's when I decided that I needed to write this book, because I have been studying something called ethical intelligence for many years. In fact, it was the subject of my doctoral dissertation. And yeah, we got it up on good. It's something that I trace back to the pyramid at Giza. The first evidence of its existence is chiseled in the wall. So I had spent a better part of my life studying ethical intelligence, getting to know what it is, understanding it. I've written books about it. And as I was watching what was happening in our community, the goodness that people were showing, the risks people were taking with their lives. After about a day of watching that, I told Linda, I said, I know what I'm seeing here. These are people acting ethically intelligently in Houston, and I need to write about this. The world needs to know what happened here. Because we talk about the division in our country. Natasha touched on it. But we have so much division, we have so much strife going on. And it's because people have lost touch with their ethical intelligence, which, as you can see, is the gift living in our consciousness. And it's very simple. It's the human gift for judging matters of fairness in relationships. It's as simple as that. Ethical dilemmas occur in a relationship, always. Leadership occurs in a relationship, always. And ethical intelligence is the gift that is inside of all of us that enables us to judge fairness in that relationship. It's that simple. And at one time, humans did that naturally, before we became tribal. And before we decided that I'm with my tribe, and if you're in a different tribe, I don't see you too well. And that's how we end up doing things to one another that through history we shouldn't do. In my research, I came across a guy who was trying to figure out why the Holocaust happened and how people could do that to one another. And he came up with this idea that because of the tribal nature of humans, and we're still tribal, the United States is the one country in the world where we have essentially gotten rid of tribes. We used to have a motto that says, out of many, one. That's our secondary motto now. But that has informed this country, I think, ever since I can remember, that we are first Americans, and then we might belong to other groups. And that's what's made this country, from the way I see things, it's made it different. We see one another as we did in the greeting at the beginning. I see you and me, you see me and you. And that's the core of ethical intelligence. We treat one another out of respect because we're all alike. And if you strip the philosophers call the accidents, or what makes our appearance what it is, you strip that away, we're all humans. And that's what we saw during Harvey. And that's what this book is all about. Simon Sinek tells us, if you want to understand something, find out the why. I'm going to give you the why of this book. Number one, I wanted to record what happened so that people coming 50 years from now can read this book and understand what we did during this hurricane. Linda and I have been members of Lakewood Church for many years. And the one thing that Pastor Joel teaches is lift the good. And that's the second reason I wrote this book, to lift the goodness that we saw in Houston. And in many of the people, or everybody in this room who actually picked up something and did something for somebody. And I wanted to draw a line in the sand that says, the city of Houston showed y'all, the world, how it's done. Follow our example. Do what we did, and the world will be a whole lot better. And that goes into the fourth reason I wrote this book, because we showed that it's possible. In fact, the title of my talk today is, It's Possible for us to live together in peace and harmony. We don't need the strife and division that we see. And it's my hope that this book, showing what we did, people can see what I talk about, ethical intelligence in action. You can see it in the stories. You can see it in what people did. So that's the why of this book. Don't worry, we're going to get the stories here in just a minute. But I want you to understand about what this book is. I use a research methodology called hermeneutic phenomenology. And that's a fancy term for saying I get into your experiences and write about them so that other people can benefit from what you experience. And that's what I did. I interviewed at least 100 people. Some in a formal manner, like public officials, It was a formal interview, and it was taped and transcribed and so forth. But I also talked to dozens and dozens of other people that I may have taken notes, but it was an informal situation, and I assured everybody that whatever they told me would be confidential. I was going to write about it, but I would change names and places and so forth. So all the stories you see in this book, people have told me, they've lived them, and they wanted you to know about them. So this book hopefully brings you close to what people experience. Besides your own experiences, we all experienced Hurricane Harvey in one way or another. Some of us were damaged by it. Others of us were not damaged physically, but emotionally. The one thing I can tell you about this storm, and it's something that's just stuck with me, is everyone I talk to about this storm has an emotional connection to it. It's almost impossible for people to talk about Hurricane Harvey and not get choked up about something that happened to them or happened to a neighbor or happened to somebody in their family. And we as humans like to avoid being emotional. But I'm going to tell you that in one of the chapters in here in this book, it says it's okay to cry. It is. You need to understand and feel your emotions. If you ignore your emotions, that's when you get into trouble. You need to understand what they are and live through them. Okay. We've talked about ethical intelligence. I'd like for you to look at these two handouts I gave you. Try and make some of this real. One of the things I found in studying this, going back almost 5,000 years, is that the idea of ethical intelligence is in every religion, faith, tradition that you can find on planet Earth. And I like to say we know what it looks like. At one time, a justice of the Supreme Court says, I can't define obscenity, but I know it when I see it. Well, I've given you these comments from Confucius so that it'll help you recognize ethical intelligence when you see it. And for those of you who study the Bible, you will recognize that everything that Confucius is talking about here is in Psalm 15. And I'm just going to repeat a couple of them. The humane, ethically intelligent person wants standing, so he helps others gain standing. He wants achievement, so he helps others to achieve. When he spies gain, he remembers what is right. When he spies danger, he's ready to risk his life. When he's faced with old promises, he does not forget his past words. Then you can be termed a humane, complete, ethically intelligent person. And Jeff Foxworthy is a comedian that I like a lot. So I try to put some of these things to using his construct. You may be ethically intelligent if you keep your promises, even if it costs you a lot more than you expected. You may be ethically intelligent if you encourage someone every day. You may be ethically intelligent if you pick up a piece of trash in the parking lot, even if it's not your trash. You may be ethically intelligent if you take full responsibility for a missed delivery date, even though the late delivery resulted from one of your team members' mistakes. Kind of a lesson in leadership. So anyway, I hope that begins to make it real for you. There are 4 parts of ethical intelligence that I want you to be aware of, and I'm going to talk about them as we talk about these stories. There's your worldview window. Your worldview window is how you see the world. You develop it where you grew up. It comes from whatever tribe you belong to. It's inculcated at a very early age. That world window is how you see the world and how you either see people or you don't see people. And one of the first stories that I'm going to talk about here is the stories of these three guys in a John boat rescuing people from a neighborhood. And in fact, I begin the introduction with this story where these two African American women, one of them is having a seizure, and they're in water that's up to it's over their waist. And they finally get both of them in the boat, and these guys rescue people like that all day long. And they rescued people, and they didn't pay attention to how they looked. Their skin color, whether they had hair, whether they were big, small, no matter what. And those three guys, one was Hispanic, one was Asian, and the other was a white guy. They saw clearly through their lens of seeing the world. This is the biggest problem we have in treating one another right, is we don't see people for who they are. We look past them. Your internal compass, it tells us what's right and what's wrong. All of us have one, but they're not all the same. Your internal compass is based on your worldview, where you grew up, what part of the world you're from. The ethical fence is your line in the sand, the difference between right and wrong. I've interviewed hundreds of executives, and I'm always amazed at what they tell me about their line in the sand. I interviewed one executive who was COO of one of the largest oil exploration companies in the world. And when he talked about his ethical fence, he says, I can barely see it. He says, I don't know most of the time where right fades to wrong. And I can talk to another CEO who will tell me, yeah, it's very bright. I know exactly where it is. And I don't ever get close to it. So you see, we're all different, but we're all the same. And finally, I touched on this, your limbic system. It's the most ancient part of your brain. It's the seat of your emotions. Most of us never realize that your limbic system is not rational. It only feels. But that's where decisions are made. That's where judgments are formed. Philosopher Hume told us that in the face of emotions, we're powerless. He said your rational mind is only a brake on your emotions. All right. I'm gonna try and leave enough time at the end so you can ask me questions. One thing I learned as I was interviewing people, I went down to the George Brown Convention Center as soon as I could get out of my house. It's difficult for me to talk about that experience because it was such a moving experience for me. But I can tell you that PTSD is not limited to people in combat. There were thousands of people in that room. I mean, huge. You know, if you've ever been to George R. Brown, you know how huge it is. People in there were happy that I was able to, I was shocked I was able to get in. Chief Acevedo had that place protected like Fort Knox. But the good Lord put a word in for me, and they let me in with no escort. And I was walking around talking to people, and I would tell them, I'm writing a book about what happened to us. And I'd like to hear your story. And everybody was happy to see me. They were just, boy, this is great, because someone needs to tell the story of what happened to us during Hurricane Harvey. Because the people that I ran into in George R. Brown had some horrendous things happen to them. And some of the stories I heard were just almost unbearable to listen to. But I saw in there people suffering from, I don't know much about PTSD, but I had I've come to think that maybe they were suffering some form of PTSD because they didn't want to talk about their experience. They were happy that I was there, that I wanted to listen to them, but most of them said, nah, I don't want to talk about that. Now, I later figured out it's because when you talk about something that's happened to you, you're actually reliving it. I mean, it's coming back in front of your mind again, and all of the emotions and everything that's attached to it flood into you, and people there, they simply didn't want to do that. But anyway, I talked to a number of people there. There's a story about Lori in the book. I'm not going to repeat it because as you can see, it was a moving experience for me writing this book. One of the things I talk about in this book is leading from the front and living your life's purpose, which is also part of being ethically intelligent, is finding out what is your mission, what are you meant to do? And I found so many people that I interviewed, that were living their life's purpose. Chief Acevedo, I walked into his office, and he's the CEO of a huge organization. And I walked in his office, I expected to see a CEO. When I walked in, I saw a police officer. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. I mean, he was in full uniform, including wearing his weapon. I mean, he could have been wearing something more comfortable. And he was so forthcoming, and he just loves what he's doing. And the one thing that he told me several times is, I lead from the front. And he says, I was out at Greens Point Mall as soon as the flooding started out there, and by the time we got done rescuing people, the water was up to here on me. Sure, I could tell you the same thing about Sheriff Gonzalez. He did the same thing. He's another person that's leading a large organization. Did y'all know that we have a jail here that has 8,000 plus inmates in it? That shocked me when I was talking to the sheriff. He said, Johnny, not only did I have to be concerned about what was going on out rescuing people, he said, I have 8,000 plus inmates here I had to take care of. And he said, we got cut off and we were having a problem getting people getting in and so forth. So two guys who knew their purpose in life and led it. And Sergeant Steve Perez is another one. His son is not here, but I quote him in the book. He said at the funeral, his father was doing what he was meant to do. The mayor isn't here. He was gracious and spent a lot of time with me. And one of the questions I asked everybody as I interviewed them, what was your brightest moment during Harvey? And I got a wide range of stories. And then what was your darkest moment? And when I asked the mayor that question, I thought, well, he's going to tell me something about, how they help people in Greens Point when the tornado went through. How many people in here know that during Hurricane Harvey, a tornado went through the Greens Point area? Show me by your hand. How many people here know that? I didn't know that until I talked to Lori, and it took the roof off of her townhouse. Anyway, I was thinking, that's the kind of story the mayor's going to tell me. But the story he told me was one, after he told me, I said, you are a mayor's mayor because no one would think about this but you. He said they had the Northeast water plant was underwater. It was totally submerged, and they were going to have to take it offline if they couldn't figure out a way to keep it running while it was submerged. So he told me this long story about how they finally kept it running all through Harvey. And when he got done, I said, that wasn't the story I was expecting. I said, that's the story I guess that the mayor would be concerned about. He says, yes, because I would have had to tell 2 million people they couldn't drink the water that was coming into their homes, the homes they were stranded in and couldn't leave. And they probably shouldn't flush the commode either. He says, I'm not going to tell people that they can't drink the water coming into their homes. and they can't flush their commodes or take a shower. So he said they finally, after 3 days, they kept it, they finally got it running. I said, okay, that was interesting. I said, do you have any others? He says, yeah. He said, we had 2 sanitation plants that were underwater. And if we couldn't keep them running, sewage would start backing up into several 100,000 homes. So he told me this long story about how they actually built a 4-mile pipeline above ground to divert the sewage so it wouldn't come up into those homes. And that's the mayor's story. Quietly leading and not taking did anybody see this story published? I didn't. I still haven't seen either one of these stories published. Well, it's in here. No one talked about those stories. They're simple stories of someone doing what he's supposed to be doing, another man living his purpose in life. Sitting on a tractor in multiple feet of water with 14 people watching a tornado go by. That's Willie's story. Imagine yourself sitting on a construction tractor and you're in 4 or 5 feet of water and you can't see anything. The mailboxes are even covered in water. It's like driving on an ocean. Well, that's what he did for hour after hour after hour, rescuing people on his tractor. Stand up, Willie. I want to recognize you. And now the story of irony. This is a story of the Houston Fire Department being called to put out a fire. And can you imagine the irony of this? You have a house that's on fire, and there's 4 feet of water in front of it, right? And the firefighters have to drag their hoses down, or actually float their hoses down the street because they can't drive their truck down there. And when they get in front of the house, they find that the fire hydrant is under 4 feet of water. So being resilient, they went underwater like scuba divers and hooked up their hoses underwater so they could take water out of the hydrant and put the fire out in the house while standing in 4 feet of water. Chief Griffin, stand up. I want to recognize that. The men of your department who do such things. I was going to tell you the story. It's called Doing the Right Thing Even if it costs you everything. But I can't tell that story without faltering because it's in the book, and I'll summarize it for you. It's a story of this woman who is helping to muck out houses. And she told me, she said, I was not very good with tools and so forth, so they kept me away from the tools. I was the errand person. She said, they sent me to go get water from time to time, or Gatorade, or whatever they were drinking while they were working on these homes. She said, well, there was this special convenience store that's kind of out of the way from me that I always went to because the clerk there is a wounded vet who was severely burned. And I liked going there because I wanted to patronize this store. So she said, I finally went to go over there to get Gatorade or drinks or whatever. Because when I got there, the parking lot was full of cars, and when I walked in the store, there was pandemonium. There were people angry and shouting at everybody. So it was just a mess. She said, I couldn't figure out what was going on. So I walked to the back of the store where the cooler was to get the drinks, and she said, then I knew what was going on. Bottles of Gatorade were $5 a piece. Bottled water was $50 a case. She says, I worked my way back up to the front of the store, and I forget his name, he was behind the counter, and he was taking abuse from all these people. And she says, I finally got up to him, and I said, why are you doing this? She says, it's not like you. She says, this is not you to treat people like this. And he said, well, The owner came by 2 days ago and said we weren't going to get any more deliveries for quite a while, so we needed to really clean up on what we had. So he raised all these prices up to these ridiculous levels. He said, and people have been coming in and complaining. He said, but they need this stuff, so they're paying for it. And she said, how do you feel about this? He said, it's wrong. He said, well, what are you going to do about it? He said, I'm going to keep selling this stuff. He said, because look at me. I mean, you disfigured. He said, nobody's going to hire me. So in the end, he leaves. He calls the owner and tells him he can't do it anymore, and locks the store and leaves. We all have to walk away sometimes, and hopefully we'll be able to do what he did. Ordinary to extraordinary. Nikki Courtney apparently couldn't make it. She is an anchor on KTRH radio. For me, she was the voice of Hurricane Harvey, like Jeff was the picture of Hurricane Harvey, the person who was on television all the time. And I have a section in this book called Unsung Heroes, people who did things that no one ever recognized. And I asked everybody I talked to, do you have any unsung heroes? And she says, yeah, I know exactly the guy I'm going to recommend. And she says, the guy in charge of selling advertising here, Rod, and he said, the people do extraordinary things, but they're ordinary. Apparently Rod made sure that the radio station had his garbage taken away every day because, nothing was being collected. He brought food in and he said he took care of everybody on the staff just as a matter of course. And then later I talked to him, I found out that he actually drove a gasoline truck, tanker truck, from Houston to Beaumont in 3 feet of water so they could keep their station on in Beaumont. Rod, please stand up. This final story is about self-reliance. I don't see Caesar here. Caesar Wright. Dr. Caesar Wright is a professor at Rice. He teaches in the engineering program. He's also an accomplished filmmaker. And he lives in southwest Houston. Well, during the tax day flood, his house flooded with 3 feet of water. And it never flooded before. So he decided that this time around, the hurricane was coming. He said they hadn't cleaned out any ditches or anything for him. So he figured he was going to have another 3-foot flood. So being the self-reliant guy he is, he went to Home Depot and bought 20,000 pounds of topsoil in bags. He said, I didn't want sand. He said, because if I used sand, I'd have all this sand, I wouldn't know what to do with it. He said, well, with topsoil, it would be just like, a landscaping project. He built a 3-foot dike around his house using these bags of topsoil. Unfortunately, the water rose to 3.5 feet. And his house was flooded a second time. And there are pictures, I've got pictures in the book. You can see where you can see the dike, and then you can see on his door, above the dike, at about 6 inches, the water line. They left the water line. And Cindy Yielding at BP told me this story, and I thought, I need to talk to this guy. I mean, he's a tremendous guy. And I'm sorry he isn't here that you could meet him. He has made at least a dozen films that you would all recognize, the names of which escape me now. He's a very creative guy. Well, he was on Good Morning Houston a couple of weeks ago, and they have a picture of him doing the ultimate self-reliant thing as he's raised his house 9 feet off the ground. Last but not least, Director Perrin was on television, and he made the comment that really stuck with me. He says, in Texas, we're victors, we're never victims. He says, we're going to put on this opera season no matter what. And they moved to the George R. Brown in room, was it A3 or 3E? And he recreated a full-fledged opera in that room. And they put on the opera for this season at the George R. Brown Convention Center. Here's a man like me who wasn't born here, but he got here as quick as he could. He's from the UK. I want to recognize Managing Director Perrin. Perrin Leach. Lessons I learned. There are 2 of them, and I'm going to end with this. I wrote this in the book, and I hope it doesn't ruffle any feathers with our other cities in the state of Texas. But I said, every community has an essence of that which makes it what it is, a personality, if you will. Houston is a blue-collar town. Here, people work with their hands. We make things, find things, transform things, move things, and heal people. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of intellectual property created and used here, but that isn't the essence of Houston. If you want a place that thinks and theorizes for a living, visit Austin. Houston gets things done. I was going to end with this quote from, I will anyway. This is called Texas Badassness. And this is something that Caesar told me when I talked to him. He says, I grew up in a place called Cut and Shoot, Texas. We lived in a trailer with a few broken windows. I learned how to live simply. I learned how to hunt and fish. Could live off the land if I had to. You could take away my cell phone, laptop, and all my other gadgets I use in my work, and I'd be okay. Give me a one-room cabin with a roof over my head, and I could easily live off the land. You could take all of these modern things away from me, including even electricity, and I would be fine. And that's what we did here in Houston, Texas. We were fine. We helped each other. We showed the world what it is to be kind and to be good. And I hope we can take this. It's my fond hope that we can take what we did here as a model of how we can all live together and help one another. Thank you for coming. I'll take any questions.